America's suburbs are dying, and it's not just about empty malls or abandoned homes. There's a deeper story here, a story about how the dream that built these neighborhoods is now tearing them apart. The reasons behind this collapse might shock you, and they might even hit closer to home than you think. So what went wrong, and is it too late to save them? Let's dig in. For decades, suburban living was the gold standard. The white picket fence, spacious backyard, and two-car garage were symbols of success. But today, many of these once thriving communities are turning into ghost towns. What went wrong? Why are these suburban dreams unraveling? And more importantly, what does the future hold for these extensive neighborhoods? Stick around, because this story might change the way you see the places we call home. The American suburb was once a symbol of prosperity and stability, but today many are on life support, facing economic struggles, demographic shifts, and environmental challenges. These problems didn't emerge overnight. They've been decades in the making, fueled by faulty planning, cultural changes, and shifting priorities. One major challenge is urbanization. Millennials and Gen Z aren't flocking to the suburbs the way their parents did. Instead, they're choosing city living, walkability, public transit, and vibrant culture are outweighing long commutes and oversized houses. Suburbs simply aren't built to cater to modern priorities. Then there's the financial strain. Maintaining suburban infrastructure, roads, water systems, schools, is expensive. As population shrinks, so does the tax base, leaving local governments scrambling to fund essential services. It's a brutal cycle. To understand why suburbs are dying, we need to look back. The suburban boom started in the post-World War II era. Returning soldiers needed housing, and the federal government encouraged homeownership through programs like the GI Bill. Developers like Levitt & Sons revolutionized construction, building massive neighborhoods quickly and cheaply. By the 1950s, suburbs became the default American lifestyle. This rapid expansion was fueled by two things: car culture and government policies. Highways were built to connect suburban neighborhoods to urban job centers, while policies like redlining shaped the racial and economic makeup of these communities. For instance, imagine being a young couple in the 1950s. The allure of owning a home in a quiet neighborhood, away from the bustling city, was irresistible. But while it felt like an escape, it was also the beginning of a dependency on cars, on fossil fuels, and on an unsustainable way of life. Nobody thought about what would happen if the growth stopped. But here's the problem. That growth wasn't unlimited, and the cracks were already forming. Even in those early days, there were warning signs. Suburbs were built to grow outward, not upward, and that sprawling model required massive amounts of land, energy, and money to sustain. At the time, it seemed like a minor inconvenience. But here's the catch. The more you expand, the harder it becomes to maintain what's already there. So when populations stagnate or decline, the whole system starts to crumble. Think about it like this. Every new mile of road or pipe isn't just an upfront cost, it's a long-term maintenance obligation. And when tax revenues don't keep pace, things fall apart. A prime example is the growing number of zombie subdivisions. These are partially built developments where houses sit unfinished, streets are deserted, and weeds overtake once pristine lawns. It's a haunting reminder of how fragile the suburban model can be. In Texas, for example, sprawling developments built during the housing boom of the early 2000s now sit largely empty. The promise of vibrant new neighborhoods vanished when the economy slowed, leaving behind eerie ghost towns. The 1950s suburban dream appealed to large families. Fast forward to today. Millennials and Gen Z are changing the housing market in ways that suburban planners never anticipated. Unlike their parents, these younger generations aren't as interested in large homes, long commutes, or car-centric lifestyles. They value urban amenities like public transit, walkability, and vibrant cultural scenes. But this isn't just about preference. It's also about economics. Many younger people simply can't afford the suburban dream. Rising home prices, student debt, and stagnant wages mean that buying a house in the suburbs is out of reach for millions. So they're choosing smaller, more affordable options in urban areas. Consider this. Over 60% of millennials surveyed in 2023 said they prefer urban living. Meanwhile, suburban populations are aging. Older residents often find it hard to maintain large homes or access essential services in car-dependent areas. The result? Entire neighborhoods that feel stuck in time, unable to attract new life. Take a look at the data. Since 2000, major cities like Austin, Denver, and Seattle have seen population booms while suburban growth has slowed significantly. People want access to jobs, nightlife, and amenities, not a 45-minute commute to get to them. These further shifts demand away from suburban living. Suburbs are expensive to maintain. Roads, schools, water systems all require constant funding, But as populations decline and younger families opt for urban living, the tax base in many suburbs is shrinking. With fewer residents paying property taxes, local governments are struggling to fund essential services. Take the case of Detroit's suburbs. Once thriving communities around the auto industry are now grappling with abandoned homes, rising crime rates, and declining schools. When jobs disappeared, so did the people, leaving these neighborhoods in a state of economic freefall. But here's the kicker. It's not just struggling cities like Detroit. Even affluent suburbs are feeling the pinch. Infrastructure ages, costs rise, and without new growth, the math simply doesn't add up. Consider the infrastructure trap. A suburban town might boast shiny new developments, but maintaining aging roads, sewer systems, and public facilities often becomes a financial nightmare when new residents don't move in to share the burden. In New Jersey, the aging suburbs face a $100 billion backlog in infrastructure repairs, and with no clear plan to generate revenue, the future looks miserable. Or take Rust Belt suburbs, for example. Once thriving, these neighborhoods now face economic stagnation. Young people are moving out, leaving aging populations behind, and businesses are reluctant to invest in areas with shrinking demand. Suburban living isn't just financially unsustainable, it's an environmental disaster. Sprawling neighborhoods mean more cars, more emissions, and more energy consumption. As climate change becomes a pressing concern, younger generations are questioning the sustainability of these living patterns. And let's not forget about land use. Suburbs eat up huge amounts of space, destroying natural habitats and farmland. The long-term impact? Loss of biodiversity and increased vulnerability to climate-related disasters like flooding and wildfires. For instance, consider the water crisis in the western United States. Suburban sprawl has exacerbated water shortages, with some areas using as much as 60% of their water supply on landscaping alone. Climate change is making these problems worse. Suburban areas are particularly vulnerable to natural disasters like flooding, which is intensified by poor land use planning. And think about this. What happens when those sprawling suburbs are hit by extreme weather events? Recovery is often slower and more expensive than in dense urban areas. Just look at the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey in Houston, where unchecked suburban sprawl worsened flooding and delayed recovery efforts. Remember when malls were the heart of suburban life? It was where teenagers hung out, families shopped, and communities gathered. Those days are gone. E-commerce giants like Amazon have rendered traditional shopping centers obsolete. Once busy malls now sit empty, symbolizing the decline of suburban culture. Without these central hubs, suburbs lose their sense of community. Social isolation becomes a bigger issue, especially for aging residents. Suburbs, designed to be private and insular, struggle to foster the kind of communal living that's becoming increasingly important in a fragmented world. So what happens when the places that once brought people together no longer exist? It's not just an economic loss, it's a cultural one too. The decline of suburbs doesn't just affect the people living there, it impacts entire regions. As suburban neighborhoods weaken, nearby cities often struggle to absorb displaced residents. Infrastructure designed for sprawling suburbs becomes a financial burden, while urban areas face increased pressure to provide affordable housing and services. But here's an interesting twist. Some urban areas are using this as an opportunity to rethink their own growth, embracing density and sustainability in ways that suburbs never did. Could this be the key to a broader solution? So can suburbs be saved? The answer isn't simple. If suburbs don't adapt, they will continue to die. But there's hope. Forward-thinking communities are finding ways to reinvent themselves. For example, some suburbs are embracing mixed-use development, blending residential, commercial, and recreational spaces. Some suburbs are going green, incorporating renewable energy, water conservation systems, and native landscaping. These efforts not only reduce environmental impact, but also make these neighborhoods more appealing to eco-conscious residents. Others are prioritizing public transit, making it easier for residents to ditch their cars. Suburbs that invest in reliable, efficient transit systems can attract younger residents who value accessibility over car ownership. Abandoned malls and big box stores are being repurposed into community centers, co-working spaces, and even housing. These transformations breathe new life into declining neighborhoods and provide much-needed amenities. Take Reston, Virginia, for example. Designed with walkability and community in mind, it's thriving because it offers what modern residents want: accessibility, diversity, and sustainability. And there's a growing movement towards sustainable design, incorporating green spaces and energy-efficient buildings. The death of America's suburbs isn't unavoidable, but it's a wake-up call. To survive, these neighborhoods must adapt to the changing needs of their residents. That means rethinking outdated designs, embracing sustainability, and fostering community connections. The suburbs of the future won't look like the ones we grew up in, and that's a good thing. Because if we get it right, we'll create spaces that are not only livable, but truly thrive in a rapidly changing world. If you found this insight fascinating, subscribe to the channel or check out our next video about cities redefining the future of sustainable urban living.